The Center for Human Systems presents the Leadership and Self-Management Program. This is Course 7, Shifting Power Dynamics, Module 1, Understanding Win-Lose Dynamics. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Leadership and Self-Mastery Program. This series, as you know, is for leaders at all levels to master the behaviors, practices, and disciplines of leadership. My name is Ronnie Gill, and I'm here with Michael Broom. And in this 7th course of the Leadership and Self-Mastery series, we're going to be talking about shifting power dynamics. So there's 2 modules. The first module will talk about what are and describe the win-lose power dynamics. And in the second module, we're going to have another sort of alternative way of looking at power in human systems that creates synergy and energy and creativity. As usual, each module has 2 parts. We're going to start with some concepts and examples, followed by an exercise. So let's get started. Michael, what is the big idea of this first module?
The big idea is that our automatic tendency to play win-lose power dynamics are the fundamental and primary source of dysfunctions in human systems. Our basic assumptions about power have a profound impact on our behavior and consequently on our personal and professional success. Us human beings do not know how to get along without creating some tension and aggravation about differences. Differences of opinion, beliefs, facts that doesn't seem to matter. We will create some tension around differences somehow or another. Sometimes we conform to get along, sometimes we argue, and way too often we're all too passive-aggressive. Typically, we're on automatic about playing win-lose. Whichever way we are doing it, it's rarely pleasant or useful, and there must be a better way.
There probably is a better way, and I'm actually really interested in this module because I think this is a trap that I fall into a lot around, I have to be right, I have to win, I have to be on top. So let's talk about the better way. What is that better way?
Well, before we get into the better way, we've got to first understand how much and how often we play win-lose, or we'll never be able to truly shift our unproductive behavior. Think about all the situations where you want to prove that you're right and the other's wrong, just as you just mentioned. Perhaps you were in a meeting recently where you couldn't wait to shoot down someone's idea. In these situations, our desire to be right and not wrong is more important than our relationships. We do it at work and we do it at home with the folks that we truly care for. We have a very unconscious and facile capacity to play win-lose while thinking we're doing something different. For example, have you or someone else accused someone of playing win-lose when that is exactly what you or they were doing? I remember a client that was a 5-person executive team that wanted to put an end to their pattern of one-upsmanship. They were bound and determined to stop it with my assistance. They're actually doing quite well until one said to another with pride, "See, you're playing win-lose and I'm not." So that's why we will get to how to stop playing win-lose, or what the alternative is, in the second module. In this module, we're going to focus on how much and how often we do play win-lose.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that second module, but I think first, tell us about how win-lose shows up and how your take on it is different. Because we've heard the phrase win-lose a lot in our lives, so let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so let's start off with an example. I mean, there are really so many, I already know which one to choose. But let's talk about a medium-sized IT consulting firm that was struggling through budget time toward the end of their first slow year. The company prided itself on being competitive in a very competitive industry. Likewise, It had a very competitive culture where each department head wanted to outshine the others. So when budget cuts were forthcoming, that competition was fierce about whose budget would get cut and whose wasn't, and how much those cuts would be. Tactics range from self-promotion, sales and marketing, to passive-aggressive backbiting, which was accounting, to open hostility, which was internal IT, to conformity with whatever anyone might say, that was human resources. Each claimed in their own way to be the most important to the company. Their competitiveness against each other was hurting the company, and they weren't getting done what needed to get done. The CEO actually settled the budget issue by cutting each department 18%. Nobody was happy with that, with several departments blaming other departments for the situation that they found themselves in. The conflicts were getting worse, not better. After 2 months of this, the CEO gave me a call. Through this situation, we can see all of the aspects of win-lose power dynamics. Sound familiar?
It does sound familiar. I think I've been in a few of those budget free-for-alls myself, so let's keep going.
Okay. Win-lose comes from the fundamental belief that power is scarce, that it is finite, and that there is not enough to go around. That's why I call it the finite perspective of power. That creates a zero-sum win-lose situation where power offers the illusion of control over others.
Mm-hmm. You know, I just want to go back to something you said about power, that this fundamental belief that power is scarce and there's a finite amount. That, I think, is really the differentiator in how you think about win-lose versus a lot of what I've heard out there. So that's really interesting. So I just wanted to call that out. And I was just thinking about zero-sum, and, you know, and zero-sum basically means that whatever someone gains on one side, it has to come as a loss from the other side if you have this finite perspective of power. So it's like playing poker. I win only if you lose. And that winning when you lose makes me feel more powerful, feels like I can control the situation and control, you know, the other person. Does that sound about right, Michael?
Absolutely. You know, it's so embedded in our culture. All the board games we play, the card games that we play, sport games that we play, we all are playing win-lose. Unfortunately, we do it even when it gets too serious. Okay, so the purpose of playing a finite game of power is to establish who is winner and who is loser. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just want to pause because I think the word game, you're using it in a very particular way here, in the sense that, you know, that life or work is the game, and we should think about it that way.
Sure.
Is that right?
Sure.
Okay.
It's like life is a game, like poker, like any card game that you've taken too seriously, a golf game that you've taken too seriously, because we perceive that our survival is at stake. Now, we'll talk about the self-survival of what, but notice that in our society, the worst thing that you can be called, in spite of all those curse words that you're not supposed to use, the worst word is the L word, the loser. We'll do anything to avoid being seen as a loser.
Yep. That's right.
That feeling that our survival is at stake is what makes it such a serious game. Hence, it easily invokes defense of our sense of self-esteem, our sense of identity, even when our physical survival really is not at stake at all. but only our sense of identity is. In those cases, deception and secrecy become strategies of choice. And you don't want anybody to see your hand or to know what you've got. You know, no one wants to be a loser. In fact, not being a loser is more important than being a winner. I had a great story about that. Was working for a major market TV station. My job was to help the new general manager, who had a great reputation for being a turnover artist, to help him get on board and help the changes that needed to be made. Unfortunately, his name was also Michael. Anyway, he'd been there about 2 weeks, and I was noticing that he didn't seem to be getting a lot done. He seemed to be walking around kind of posturing and acting like he knew what he was doing, but I couldn't find any substance, and some of his vice presidents were getting a little perturbed about it. So he and I were on pretty good terms. So we sat down and had lunch together. And I said, Michael, it seems to me that it seems that is more important to you to look good than actually learn how to turn this TV station around. He looked at me and in all sincerity said, oh my God, no, that's not the case at all. I'm not trying to look good. I'm trying not to look bad. You know, you may laugh, but he was dead serious for sure. Yeah.
And he didn't, so he didn't see any irony in what he was doing.
Not at all, because this was a very serious game. Absolutely. And when we're stuck in it, and we can't see ourselves, it's super serious.
And I think that being perceived as a loser in this culture, if you get perceived as a loser, you become an outsider. You're outside of the game because you lost, right? And nobody wants to be an outsider. Everyone wants to belong, be a part of the game. I've heard stories in Silicon Valley of people who were cut out of deals. They were cut out of the game, and they just spiraled downhill. They just couldn't handle not being in the game and being a loser.
Sure, think about any partnership. If the win-lose dynamics become too difficult, then that partnership is about to end, and somebody is going to get kicked out.
That's right.
So even if let's say that someone is an employee and they want to be part of making decisions. Well, if they are seen as a loser, they are not allowed into the decision-making process. So it doesn't mean that they're going to get fired, but they certainly get kicked out of the decision-making process if they're seen too often as a loser.
Okay.
All right.
So is there more that you want to share around win-lose?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Here's the big one. We use differences to define who is the winner and who is the loser. Differences, therefore, are threatening. Think about it. Given the distinction, top and bottom, which one typically wins in our society?
A top.
More or less.
More.
Fast, slow.
Fast.
Notice we don't even need to talk about more what or fast what. We have been socialized to come up with these distinctions about which one wins and which one loses. Now, right. there are some areas where we're trying to change, such as black-white. Traditionally, white wins in our society. I'm black. You're brown, so you ain't white either. So now we're trying to change that. But as long as we're stuck in playing win-lose for people of color to win, then people who are white are going to lose. Now, that's a major problem for white folks. And they traditionally, and no, they generally, typically are not willing to go there. Like, I've not met one that is. So for all these racial and ethnic issues to change, we've got to lose this or get rid of this win-lose dynamic. We're doing the same thing with gender issues. Traditionally, male wins, female loses, and anything other than heterosexual definitely loses. And as long as we are stuck in win-lose, we won't change that. So we've got to find a different way of how we deal with differences.
Okay. Yeah, just reflecting on what you said, you know, I agree that the biggest problem is that we frame a lot of these equity issues around gender and race around win-lose power dynamics, when it's, you know, if we had a different perspective on power, it wouldn't have to be that way. And I'm also thinking that, you know, as you talk about differences, you know, there are these differences that you talk about are a way of defining who's a member of a group and who's not, you know. So when you say differences, you're talking about everything, right? Any potential difference, not just gender or color. It could be who's poor, who's rich, all of those kinds of differences.
Anytime that some differences represent something that is an offense to my sense of self-esteem or identity, I will start playing win-lose if I'm on automatic. So it could be something as simple as my report was late. Now, on the surface, that might not seem like a big deal. But if I'm feeling like, oh my God, the boss is going to think that I'm a loser. So the way I defend that my report was late, it wasn't my fault. It was Joe's fault because he didn't get me the data that he promised me on time. Because even being a victim is better than being a loser. So it really isn't the difference that is in front of us. It's whenever that difference represents something that we have attached our sense of self-esteem to, we will flip into this win-lose mode. All right.
Yeah, so I'd rather be a victim than being seen as incompetent.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because people who are incompetent are losers.
Got it.
Yes, so it wasn't my fault. Yes, okay. And Joe really doesn't report to me, and so I don't have any control over him, you know. I asked him for it, you know, but, you know, he said he would, but he didn't do it, you know. Excuses, excuses, excuses. Yes.
Is there other aspects of win-lose power dynamics that you want to share?
Win-lose power dynamics engender in human systems displays of open hostility, passive aggressiveness, dominant submissive behavior, because being different is risky. Conformity is safe as a means of avoiding being a loser. I'll simply agree with whatever the boss says, even if inside I know this is really a bad idea. Think about the HR person in the IT company that I was talking about that was willing to agree to just about anything to avoid being in the conflict. Yes. All right. Well, this is one we've already talked about. If losing looks like is going to come toward me, then it's time for me to blame someone or something else and claim that I was a victim of someone else's error, which is better than being a loser, right? We've already talked about that.
Mm-hmm. You know, I just want to go back to the example that you talked about the HR person that is willing to agree with anything to avoid conflicts, right? Because there's several power dynamics at play. There's a gender power dynamic at play. You often, not always, there as well. And I guess my question is, you know, we may be getting to this, but if you're in a position where the person you're having these power dynamics with is your boss, you know, you don't want to lose your job. So that's, I think, where a lot of that agree to get along behavior comes from. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there, and we don't have to discuss it at this point, but I'd love to come back to it.
You know, actually, it's a pretty important point, you know, because people often say, I didn't want to say anything because I'd get fired if I did. And I always wonder how sound and current is that data. And often it isn't very sound and current at all. But the perception of that risk is certainly present. And if I lose my job, I will certainly be a loser. Mm-hmm. That's why people will stay even in jobs that they can't stand rather than actually move on, because
right.
At least I'm not a loser here, even though I don't.
Well, I think what's even worse is where you get sidelined in the game, right? So I'm in HR, I push back, I'm perceived as someone who is pushy, and so no one wants to play with me, so I don't get the projects, or I don't get brought into certain meetings because I've pushed back too much. I create too much friction. I think that's the other part of that power, the struggle that goes on. But like I said, this was an aside and not to your key points around win-lose power dynamics.
There is another point to be made there, you know, that I rarely see an outfit where the conflicts were kind of overt, such as in that IT outfit that we were talking about. Most of the companies that I get called into, the conflicts have gone underground because no one wants to speak up.
Right.
Because they are afraid of being on the wrong side of the conflict, hence being a loser. So conformity is the way to go. And one of the hardest parts I have to deal with in my work is how to support people in opening up, which is about how to support my client in behaving in a different way so that people will be willing to speak up, so that we can surface the conflicts, so that then we have an opportunity to possibly resolve them in a healthy way. When they go underground, they just fester and get worse. So
got it.
The open conflict is one thing. The hidden passive-aggressive conflicts are even worse because they're harder to get at. All right.
Great.
Power is scarce. This whole idea of power is scarce. That drives the whole win-lose thing is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it triggers win-lose behavior, which triggers others to play win-lose. And no one can prove to somebody that's stuck in playing win-lose isn't the right way to go, because that's how the world is. So I really don't have any choice about it. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, we're going to also see that the alternative is also a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is interesting because it really makes it simply a choice. So we're really right back to conscious use of self. Now, at some point, you have to ask yourself, if this win-lose finite perspective of power is so awful then so unproductive. Why does it exist in the first place? You wouldn't think that we would be so wedded to something that is so unproductive. Well, here's the answer to that. The finite perspective is a paradigm of choice when our physical survival truly is at stake. Now, imagine, there goes that chair. Imagine that I'm lost in the woods and I'm hungry. I've been lost in the woods for a day and a half now. And a little bear comes along and the little bear is hungry. Now, one of us is going to be dinner. One of us is going to have dinner. Now, that's the win-lose dynamic that makes sense. So win-lose is a paradigm of choice when our physical survival is at stake. And it is because we are so good at playing win-lose, we have become, the human species has become the most powerful on earth because we know how to play it so well. We just have to begin to put some curbs on it because we don't live in such a physically dangerous world anymore. Mm-hmm. Instead, what we've done is act and speak as if the survival of our egos is at stake. If we can manage our egos, shades of conscious use of self, and our need to play win-lose decreases dramatically.
You know, Michael, I'll be perfectly honest. It is really, really difficult to remain conscious of the different ways that we play win-lose. I mean, it's just, for me, sometimes such an automatic behavior. The need to prove myself right or prove others wrong. And, you know, but it's also embedded in the psyche of the business world of, you know, we are competitive as organizations. We get out in the world and we compete to win markets. And then, you know, it's hard then to shift that behavior when you come internally. You're basically switching gears. You're downshifting or doing something different. So I think that, you know, we play win-lose in the marketplace. And then what you're suggesting is we stop playing it when we come internal.
Well, you know, you were right on target, but it's really worse than you were saying. The business world plays win-lose because us human beings play win-lose. We don't just play win-lose in the competitive environment of business. We play win-lose with our friends. We play win-lose with our children. We play win-lose with our significant others. So it pervades our lives. It's not just the business world. Can you say that you only play win-lose when you're at work?
Of course not. I play it at home all the time.
Oh, of course. So yeah, it's everywhere. And yeah, we won't stop it by ourselves. And we've talked so often about support systems, but we'll get to that in the next module. But what we're getting at is the notion to begin to understand how often we play win-lose, even though we don't particularly like the idea that we do that. And hence many of us are in denial about it. But once you begin to think about it, you know, oh my God, we play win-lose with our parents, with our children, but you know, we play it everywhere. Yeah. That's why this course, this whole program actually, and its emphasis on conscious use of self and support systems and contracting are so important. Playing win-lose is a major energy sponge in organizations and actually in any human system. Now, pay attention to this. Win-lose always becomes lose-lose whenever it's our sense of self-esteem or identity is all that's is at stake rather than our actual physical survival. So we are so on automatic about this that a great deal of conscious use of self, as you were just saying, is required to make the shift with any consistency. I caught myself last week having thoughts that were leaning toward win-lose with a board member where I'm the board chair. Fortunately, I caught myself and switched my thinking to the alternative perspective that we'll discuss in the next mode. Now, I've been doing this work, for 30, 40 years, and I still catch myself really wanting to play win-lose.
Yeah, I think, I'm just reflecting upon the times that I've played win-lose in a similar kind of meeting environment that you were just describing, and where someone takes up a lot of space and just keeps talking and talking and talking, I have often just shut that person down because it's like, all right, let's move on to a different perspective, or let's hear something else. And I haven't always done it in the most gentle manner. And I think that, or the most conscious manner, I should say. And as a result, you could see that person kind of in their body language shut down themselves. So, I guess what I'm struggling with is like how hard it is. I'm reflecting on myself, how hard it is to interrupt yourself when you keep going back to conscious use of self and to play a different game.
Well, I taught a course in psychological statistics many, many, many years ago. And this course had this reputation of being really, really hard. And so my opening talk with my class was, you can focus on how hard this is, or you can focus on maybe we can get it done. So again, it's just one more choice that you have to make. Do you want to focus on how hard it is, or do you want to start doing the work of building a support system and building that conscious use of self muscle, that can really be of help here. So just something to think about.
Great. Thank you for that example. So just to sum up, we've been talking about win-lose power dynamics and how pervasive they are in our organizations and in our lives. And we often don't even recognize when we're doing the win-lose because they're just so embedded in our cultural way of thinking and doing and communicating. So, Michael, how do we shift this mindset?
Well, let's kind of bottom line this first and do an exercise so that we can really begin to see how we play win-lose so that it is not just an abstract concept, but that we can actually see it in our own lives.
So what is this exercise that we're going to be doing around win-lose?
Well, this exercise has got 4 steps focused on helping us understand how we play win-lose. Now, this will just be one example here, but for those of you who are listening, take this example, apply it to your life, apply it to as many situations as you can, and we'll remind you about that again after the exercise. Okay. We've got 4 steps for you.
Okay.
First step, describe a situation where you just knew that you were right, or it could be a current situation where you know that you're right and the other is wrong.
Well, I'm going to focus on a work situation where I was absolutely certain about the direction that this company needed to take in terms of its educational offerings. And I, made a case for it. Everyone agreed, and they decided to move away from my recommendation in a completely different direction. Anyways, so that was the situation.
So this was your recommendation,
mm-hmm.
but you said they moved in another direction. Who's they? The CEO?
They was the CEO and a couple of VPs.
Okay.
Actually, one VP. So, yeah.
Okay. So which person, if they had come along with you, it would not have been an issue?
The CEO.
Yeah. Okay. So this is really between you and the CEO. You were
Correct.
right. She's clearly wrong. Okay.
Right.
Describe your belief system that makes being right in this situation so important to you.
Well, I mean, that one's pretty easy. I came from a very large organization that was well known for the kind of work that I did. And this is a much smaller organization. So, I was bringing all this expertise and they weren't listening to me, is what it came down to. And it was really, really frustrating.
So when you're not being listened to, that sounds like you were being discounted.
Discounted, perceived as incompetent.
Oh, boy.
That was the other part of it. I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff. So
yeah. So I can see why, this was so important to you, because this had a lot to do with who you see yourself as being.
Yeah, it had to do with my identity as a professional and how it completely undermined that.
Cool.
It wasn't cool, Michael. It wasn't cool at all. It was so uncool. But please continue.
I hear you for sure. Yeah.
Honestly, in all honesty, it was one of the most painful moments or periods of my life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So what is the story that you made up about how that situation could come to be? It's probably a story about the CEO in this company.
Well, the story that I made up was really that the CEO didn't know how to win in the marketplace around this thing. She didn't know how to make persuasive, useful educational offerings. She didn't understand her audience, is what it came down to. I'd been talking to the audience, I understood what they wanted and needed. And the other story I made up is that she was a narcissist and self-centered.
I see. Was this information verified in any way? Like, was this sound and current data?
Well, for me, it was sound and current data, because the people I was listening to really, needed the direction that I suggested of smaller, more tangible, useful bits of information rather than large courses. And so I felt like my point of view was being validated by the audience that would be buying, that would actually be using this stuff, as opposed to the audience that would be buying this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that to me was sound and current data. Mm-hmm. And also what I was hearing in the larger marketplace about how people.
So what you were recommending was sound and current data. I get that, but your thoughts about her not knowing how to do all the things you mentioned that she didn't know how to do, because that's really what you were saying, was that sound and current data.
Probably not. I think what it was is she just had, she's obviously been the CEO for like 20, 30 years, and she had survived, 2 downturns, which was quite remarkable. So you have to kind of, she knew something that I didn't know around how to survive in the marketplace. And, for whatever reason, either she couldn't communicate that or I couldn't listen. So that was the story that I made up. She was just a narcissist.
Right. Yeah. So, which of course bolsters your point that you're right and she's wrong. Yeah. Super.
Yeah.
This is how we do it. All right. So what was the difference that was truly at issue? Let's take that part first, and then we'll go to the second part of this question.
Okay. Well, the difference is who got to make the decisions, right? She hired me to make the decisions around the educational offerings at this company. And she was making all the decisions and telling me what to do, and I just wasn't expecting that. That was not what I thought we agreed to. Yeah, that was confusing for me.
So I hear it was confusing, but the
No, I
difference
was pissed off about it, actually. Let me put it that way. So yeah.
that sounds a little bit more on target for sure.
Yeah.
So the difference was she hired you with the expectation that you would make decisions, but she kept making the decisions that were different than the decision that you would make.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem is she didn't actually hire me. Her second in command hired me. Okay. And with this idea of I would be pushing towards a decision, which I, pushing the company in a certain way, which I did, but it wasn't really the second command that I was working with. It was the CEO. So I should have actually spent more time talking with her and understanding what her perceptions were. Yeah.
Interesting. So that it started out that the issue was about the decision to do online learning or not do online learning. And now it begins to shift to something else for sure. But this is quite normal, and that is what happens.
I think fundamentally it came down to the decision of what was my job, right? What I perceived my job to be, what the company perceived the job to be, or what the CEO perceived the job to be. And I just wasn't willing to do what they wanted me to do, and that obviously wasn't going to work out. So
what is it they wanted you to do that you didn't want to do?
Just do a different type of work, like you mentioned, online versus in person, and develop in-person stuff. And that I've done that 7 years I've done that for 7 years, and I was wanting to do something different.
And she didn't want you to do that thing that was different.
That was not what that was. Yeah. So she didn't, that was not what she perceived the marketplace as going. So.
Okay, now let's move to the second part. Mm-hmm. If you could learn from that difference of opinion with her, as if who's right and who's wrong were not important to you, and your goal was to make a positive change in that system, what might you possibly have done differently?
Other than quit sooner.
Well, that is a good option. Yeah. So you say that facetiously, but it is a real option.
I think what I would have done differently there is just really have an honest conversation about the direction I thought we needed to move in, and what they needed at that point. And that honest conversation didn't happen until towards the end, and it was really not a pretty conversation at that point, and are pretty useful, let me put it that way, for anyone involved. And yeah, so I think what it came down to is this idea of that just saying this, just being really honest about what I thought I was hired to do, and just be more willing to put a stake in the ground around that. And just, if that wasn't the direction they want to move in, that's totally fine. They really just need to find someone else.
Would it have ever been useful for you to also be more curious about where she was coming from and why she was coming from wherever that was, to see if you might understand her better?
I was curious, and it was, I knew where it was coming from. It was coming from the conversation she was having with clients, so the buyers rather than the actual learners, and which is obviously important because these are people that are going to buy your courses. Yeah. So I was aware of that. I guess I just saw the need as different. So.
But in terms of having a conversation with her, I hear your part of the conversation where you're giving her information. I don't
Right.
hear the part where you are taking in any information from her. Because that's what makes a conversation.
So your question is, what kind of questions could I have asked? Or
No, you mentioned that there was a lot of data that you were making up, but I don't hear you being curious about, I wonder why she thinks this. I wonder why she thinks that. Could you tell me more about this and that? You know?
Well, that's what I was saying, Michael, is I did have a conversation with her, and she did tell me why she wanted to move in that direction. And that's where I was talking about the buyers and whatnot. You know, she had a different audience that she was speaking to. And yeah. So, I mean, I was aware of her perspective. I just didn't agree with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, because what we're doing is actually moving into the second module, which is about how we can learn from differences. And I hear where you are, that at least at this point, that there was nothing that you could learn from her about this situation.
You know, if I wanted to make a positive change in you know, in that environment, if I really wanted to stay there, I would have taken the time to just say, okay, let's do this one thing if we can do these other things. But it just, you know, something in the environment wasn't working for me. I think there was a larger issue at stake here in terms of my expectations. And yeah, so I actually did not have a goal of making a positive change in the system.
Yes.
You know, and that became abundantly clear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we get to see how we get stuck in playing win-lose.
Yeah.
And again, for those who are listening, you do this exercise through several situations, some at home, some at work, just so you can begin to see how frequently we wind up playing win-lose when it really might not serve us very well.
You know, if we wanted to, Michael, I could also do an example from my personal life, which is much easier to do.
Please go for it.
We don't have to go there. Oh, you want me to go for it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that. So, you know, work situations aside, and maybe there's a parallel. There's a parallel here. I think that, you know, one of the places obviously is in my relationship with my partner. I'm often playing win-lose there. And the win-lose has to do with, it could be anything. It's about, you know, the fact that he makes too much of a mess when he makes dinner. And he points out, well, I'm making dinner. And I'm like, well, you don't have to make so much of a mess. And so my belief is that, you know, as you go along, you should be cleaning up. I expect him to act like me. Actually, can we just cut this part? I don't want to talk about my husband.
But notice how well it fits.
So you want me to keep going?
If you're willing to.
All right.
It's up to you. Yeah.
All right. So my belief system is that really it's not pretty. I mean, I just think somehow and I think this comes as a deeply embedded belief system from my childhood, is that I'm better than this person, and that's why I am right. And that's the way I grew up in a very racist school. And I remember having very distinct thoughts around this, is that I am better than these other people, therefore I'm right, or I'm smarter, all these other things. And I think that and also my family system was one where, it was very much win-lose dynamics. And usually my brother, got the first dibs at the food and got, control of the remote and stuff like that, because he was older and bigger than me. So, the story that I made up, is it sound in current data when it comes to my partner? Yeah, no, it's not, because I'm obviously have these other dynamics going on in my life or in my previous life, where I'm kind of playing that it triggers whatever set of dynamics happened at an earlier time. And so the difference is just, the difference comes down to is how you do something. So how do you, in this particular instance, in the example I was providing you, how do you cook? How do you clean? What is neat? What is a neat house? How do you drive? Is it fast? Is it slow? There's so many differences where I just do it differently than he does. And it's not like the outcome is different. We still get a fabulous dinner. We still get a clean kitchen. We still get to the destination in one piece. Though, in some cases, one's heart is racing. And I think that, so I think the other part of your question was, so that the difference at issue is just really, who's right and who's wrong. Go ahead.
Right? And if being right or wrong were not important to you in those situations, what might you do differently to make a positive change in that relationship?
I would just pause and say nothing, and just, or say it, or just, accept that, hey, he's making a fabulous dinner, and I should just accept the food and have gratitude around that, and stop complaining about the dishes. Or if I really felt strongly about it, don't do the dishes and see what happens, which I have done on occasion, and there they are the next morning. But hey, I usually am in a better headspace at that point and able to clean them up. But I think it's just that whole process of letting go of being right. And in the work example I provided, I think it was the same dynamic at play. I just had to let go of being right and think about, what is the larger goal that I'm trying to achieve here? Do I want to continue this relationship? And obviously with my partner, I do. And obviously with the work situation, it really wasn't working out. I did not want to continue. And they didn't want to continue with me at that point. It got to that point. So, so it was mutual. Yeah. So.
Just want to say that I thank you very much for being willing to go there, because between those two examples, or with those two examples, it just shows us, this is how we live our lives.
Yes.
And that there's a possibility of shifting that. And it's hard.
It is hard.
Maybe it's worthwhile. So it's something to consider.
Yep, indeed. All right, let's take a big breath.
Yes.
So, so that's the end of the exercise of this first module. And we'll be right back with the next module of how you can actually shift these power dynamics.